The weight of 40 years is not felt in the bones or the graying of the hair, but in the crushing realization that the foundation you were supposed to build has turned out to be nothing more than shifting sand beneath your feet. Most people reach the midpoint of their lives and expect to see a fortress of security and a legacy of stability. But for many, the mirror only reflects a man who has run a marathon in the wrong direction and ended up exactly where he started, with nothing but exhaustion to show for it. To find yourself broke at this age is a specific kind of cold that the world does not prepare you for, because society equates your value with your accumulation and your dignity with your debt-to-income ratio. However, a true Stoic investment strategy teaches us that your current bank balance is a preferred indifferent, which is something that is nice to have, but fundamentally irrelevant to the core of your character and your capacity for reason. When you finally develop a genuine wealth mindset, you stop viewing your empty pockets as a tragedy and start seeing them as a blank slate upon which a more powerful version of yourself can be written. Achieving total financial control does not begin with a windfall or a promotion, but with the absolute mastery of your own internal landscape and the refusal to let external lack dictate your internal peace. If you are starting from zero at 40, you are not behind, because you are finally at the point where the illusions of youthful vanity can no longer distract you from the stark necessity of virtue and logic. The man who has lost everything is the only one who is truly free to build something that the world can never take away, because he no longer fears the fall that has already occurred. To move forward, you must realize that your primary asset is not the money you do not have, but the time you still possess, and the logic you have yet to apply to the choices of your daily life. The weight of your past is only a burden if you insist on dragging it into a future that remains entirely unwritten. You must learn to stand in the ruins of your old life and see not a disaster, but a foundation for a fortress of the mind that will eventually become a fortress of reality. Every second you spend mourning the years you lost is a second stolen from the life you have left to build, and the silence of the present is the only place where your new wealth can begin to grow. Arthur sat in the kitchen of his small apartment, where the only sound was the low hum of a refrigerator that seemed to be complaining about its own age and the lack of food inside it. At 40 years old, Arthur had reached the point where the expectations of his parents and the comparisons with his peers had become a sharp blade that cut into his self-esteem every single hour of the waking day. He had spent his entire 30s chasing ghosts and following trends that promised quick riches, and believing that the next big thing would finally be the one that saved him from the mediocrity he so desperately feared. He had experienced the crushing weight of market volatility, not just in the economic sense, but in the way his own motivation rose and fell with every temporary success and every inevitable setback that followed. He had no capital preservation, because he had lived as if the future were a distant country that he would never actually have to visit or inhabit. This total lack of emotional discipline had left him stranded at the midpoint of his life, with a resume of half-finished projects and a bank account that mocked his age with its recurring zeros. He looked at his hands and saw the calluses of a decade of aimless effort, and he felt a shame so deep that it made the very air in the room feel heavy and hard to breathe. He watched the world move past his window, where younger men in expensive cars were heading toward lives that seemed infinitely more structured and meaningful than his own. He felt like a ghost haunting a city that had moved on without him, and he wondered if there was any point in trying to start over when the finish line seemed so far away. The narrative of his life had become one of constant struggle and quiet desperation, where every day was a battle just to stay above water while wearing a suit of iron. He was drowning in a sea of his own making, and he had forgotten how to swim or even why he should try to reach the shore. He remembered the friends he had lost because he was too proud to admit he was failing, and the opportunities he had burned because he was waiting for a perfect moment that never arrived. The silence of his apartment was a physical presence that reminded him of everything he had not said and everything he had not done. He felt the phantom vibration of his phone, hoping for a message of salvation, but knowing that no one was coming to rescue him. He was alone with the ghost of his potential and the reality of his failure. You have likely felt this same anxiety when looking at your own bank account and wondering if you have wasted the best years of your life on things that did not matter in the end. You have felt the panic of realizing that the clock is ticking, and that you are not where you thought you would be, and that the world seems to be moving faster while you are standing still. This is the moment of the great transition, where the pain of staying the same finally becomes greater than the pain of changing everything you know. Arthur realized that his debt was not just financial but spiritual, because he had borrowed against his own integrity for years. He had lied to himself about his progress, and he had avoided the mirror because he knew the truth was waiting there. The city outside remained indifferent to his suffering, and the trees in the park continued to grow without a single thought of the stock market. He saw that the universe was not conspiring against him, but was simply operating according to its own nature. His failure was not a cosmic punishment, but a natural result of a life lived without a compass, and he understood that the only way out was to accept the total responsibility for his current state. In the middle of this darkness, Arthur found a small, worn book at the bottom of a box he had never unpacked during his last 3 moves. It was a copy of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and as he began to read the private thoughts of the Roman emperor, he realized that his suffering was not a result of his poverty, but a result of his judgment of his poverty. Marcus Aurelius did not speak of Stoic principles from a place of comfort or academic theory, but from the front lines of a brutal war and the weight of an empire that was slowly crumbling around him under the pressure of plague and invasion. He taught that the mind is its own place, and that we have the power to retreat into our own inner citadel whenever the world becomes too chaotic to bear or too painful to inhabit. The core of this philosophy is the understanding that we do not control what happens to us, but we control how we perceive and respond to what happens to us. Arthur realized that being broke at 40 was an external event that he had labeled as a disaster, but in the eyes of a Stoic, it was merely a set of facts to be dealt with through reason and steady action. The emperor wrote that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. For Arthur, his lack of money was no longer an obstacle, but the very catalyst he needed to rebuild his life on a foundation of virtue rather than vanity. He began to apply the concepts of portfolio management to his own character, realizing that his time and his energy were the most valuable assets he had ever possessed, and he had been spending them like a fool on things that brought no return. He visualized his life as a captain of a ship that had been battered by a massive storm and had lost all of its cargo to the depths of the ocean. The captain does not spend his remaining days weeping over the lost gold at the bottom of the ocean, but he focuses on the rudder and the stars and the immediate survival of his remaining crew. The ship is still a ship, and the captain is still a captain regardless of the cargo that was lost. The mountain does not move because the weather changes, and the Stoic does not change his worth because his bank balance fluctuates with the whims of the economy. Arthur saw that his true wealth was his ability to think and to act and to endure with a clear mind. If you focus on your internal control, write indifferent in the comments. This word serves as a shield against the judgments of a world that measures a man by his possessions rather than his purpose. By embracing the indifference to external things, Arthur was finally able to find the peace he had been chasing for 20 years in all the wrong places. He began to understand that Marcus Aurelius was not just an emperor, but a man who understood the fundamental fragility of all things and the necessity of building a life on the only thing that is truly ours, which is our faculty of choice. He started to see his poverty as a training ground and a gymnasium for the soul where he could develop the muscles of resilience and the bones of character. The emperor reminded him that at any moment he could depart from life, and that this should regulate what he did and said and thought. This realization stripped away the shame of being broke, because it reminded him that we all end up in the same earth, regardless of the size of our brokerage accounts. The only thing that remains is the quality of the life we lived and the strength of the mind we cultivated. He learned to distinguish between his actual needs and his social desires, and he saw that the emperor of the world required very little to be a good man, and that Arthur required even less to be a free man. He found an analogy in the way a fire consumes everything that is thrown into it and turns the obstacles into fuel and flame. He decided that every bill he couldn't pay and every judgment he received would be the wood for his own internal fire. He would not just survive his poverty, but he would use it to illuminate the path forward for himself and his community. He saw that Marcus Aurelius had used his absolute power to serve his people, and Arthur would use his absolute lack of power to serve his own reason. He stopped looking at the stars as a way to predict his fortune and started looking at them as a reminder of the vastness of time and the smallness of his temporary troubles. He realized that the same sun that shone on the legions of Rome was shining on his small kitchen today, and that the same logic that guided the emperor was available to the broken man. To transform his life, Arthur created a framework based on the daily application of reason to every financial and personal choice he made from the moment he woke up until the moment he fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. He understood that long-term investing was not just a strategy for money, but a way of living where every single action is a seed planted for a future harvest of character and stability. He began by implementing a strict audit of his life and learning how to stop impulse spending by asking himself if every purchase was a necessity or a distraction from his ultimate goal of internal and external freedom. He realized that he had been buying things he did not need with money. He did not have to impress people he did not even like, and he stopped that destructive cycle immediately with a cold and clinical precision. He focused on building wealth quietly away from the gaze of society, and without the need for external validation or status symbols that only served to increase his debt and decrease his peace of mind. He treated his time with the same reverence that a miser treats his gold, and he stopped wasting his precious hours on entertainment that did not add to his character or his knowledge of the world. He created a simple budget that prioritized survival and the slow accumulation of a small emergency fund, which Marcus Aurelius would have called a buffer against the whims of fate and the accidents of the body. Every dollar he saved was a brick in the wall of his inner citadel, and every debt he paid off was a chain he was breaking from his old life of slavery to the opinions of others. He took a job that most of his former associates would have found beneath them, but he performed his tasks with the excellence of a master craftsman, knowing that all work is an opportunity to practice the virtue of diligence and patience. He did not care about the title or the prestige, because his pride was now rooted in his own discipline, rather than his public image or his social standing in a world of vanity. He realized that the only true way to fail was to act against his own nature and his own reason, and to let his emotions drive the car of his life into a ditch. By focusing on the small daily actions, he was able to build a massive momentum that eventually led to a level of stability he had never known in his chaotic 30s. He stopped checking the market of social approval and started checking the market of his own conscience every single night before he closed his eyes to rest. This practical framework allowed him to move from a state of constant panic and reactive fear to a state of calm and directed action. He was no longer a victim of his circumstances, but a builder of his own destiny, who used the stones of his failures to build the stairs of his success. He lived by the principle that he would only concern himself with what he could control and let the rest happen as it must according to the nature of the universe. He learned to embrace the silence of his apartment as a space for growth rather than a vacuum of loneliness. He began to wake up earlier and exercise his body with the same intensity that he exercised his mind, realizing that a strong vessel is required for a strong soul. He stopped complaining about the past and started focusing on the next 5 minutes and the next 5 hours and the next 5 days. He understood that wealth is a byproduct of a well-ordered life and not a goal that can be chased directly without the foundation of character. He practiced poverty as a form of exercise, eating simple meals and wearing simple clothes, so that the fear of losing money would never again have the power to make him act like a coward. He became a man of his word not because he wanted to be liked, but because he wanted to be a person he could respect when he looked in the mirror. His relationships changed as he stopped seeking validation and started seeking the company of those who valued virtue over vanity. He became a mentor to himself, reading the letters of Seneca and the discourses of Epictetus, alongside the meditations of the emperor. He saw that the wisdom of the ancients was a practical map for the modern desert, and he followed that map with the devotion of a man who had finally found the way home. The transformation was not fast and it was not glamorous, but it was real and it was deep. He was no longer a man broke at 40, but a man who had discovered that he was wealthy in the only ways that truly mattered. He understood that true financial control is the ability to say no to the world and yes to yourself. He realized that his previous attempts at wealth were built on a desire to be envied, but his new wealth was built on a desire to be free. He learned to find joy in the smallest things, like the clarity of his thoughts or the ability to pay a small bill on time without panic. He practiced the art of negative visualization, imagining he could lose even the little he had left so that he would always be grateful for the present moment. He became a silent force in his environment, moving with a purpose that others could sense but couldn't quite explain. His wealth began to grow not because he was chasing it, but because he had become a person who was capable of holding it without being corrupted by it. He saw that the true return on investment was the peace of mind that comes from knowing you have done your best with what you have. Arthur began to realize that the structure of his day was the structure of his life, and he guarded his routine as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. He understood that emotional discipline was the key to unlocking every other door, and he practiced it in every small interaction, from the way he spoke to a cashier to the way he handled a mistake at work. He stopped looking for heroes in the magazines and started becoming the hero of his own internal narrative. He found that by simplifying his life, he had actually made it much larger, because he now had the mental energy to think about the great questions and the deep truths. He was no longer a man who was broke at 40, but a man who was rich at 41, because he had finally realized that wealth is the ability to live according to your own reason and nothing else. The story of Arthur is a powerful reminder that the system in which we live is designed to keep you in a state of fear and desire, so that you are easier to control and more likely to spend your life in debt. They want you to believe that you are defined by your age and your bank account, and your status in the eyes of others. But Stoicism is the ultimate rebellion against these lies. Marcus Aurelius taught us that the only true freedom is the ability to master your own mind and to live in accordance with nature regardless of the external conditions of your life. The pursuit of money should never be about the accumulation of objects, but about the purchase of your own time so that you can live a life of meaning and service to the greater good. The system wants you poor in spirit and addicted to the noise of the world, but Stoicism makes you free by showing you that your value is independent of your net worth. The true Stoic can lose everything today and still be the richest man in the city, because his home is built in the fortress of his own reason and his own character. Realize that every time you resist the urge to compare yourself to others, you are winning a battle for your soul, and you are reclaiming your life from the void of digital noise and social pressure. True freedom is not having the ability to buy anything you want, but having the discipline to want nothing that is outside of your control or your necessity. Master your desires and you will master your destiny, and you will find that it is never too late to start again with a clear mind and a steady hand. The ruins of your 40 years are not a grave, but a garden where you can plant the seeds of a new and more powerful existence if you are willing to do the work. The world will try to convince you that you are a failure if you don't meet their arbitrary deadlines, but you must remember that nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished in its own time. Arthur at 50 was a different man, not because he had millions in the bank, but because he had peace in his heart and a mind that was no longer a slave to the flickering lights of the world. He had learned that the secret to a good life is not to have everything you want, but to be satisfied with what you have while working for what is necessary. He understood that the only true catastrophe is the loss of one's own integrity. As you close this video, look at your own life and ask yourself where you are seeking validation and where you are hiding from the truth of your own potential. Do not wait for a perfect moment or a better market or a sign from the universe. The sign is the breath in your lungs and the reason in your mind. Take the first step today toward your own inner citadel, and do not look back at the years that have passed, except to learn the lessons they have left behind. You are the captain of your ship, and the wind is just the wind. Your destination is the person you choose to be in this very moment. You are not your past, and you are not your debt, and you are not the mistakes you made when you were younger. You are the consciousness that can observe those things and choose a different path starting right now. The silence of the city at night is not a vacuum, but a canvas for your new vision. Let the noise of the world fade, and let the voice of your own reason become the only authority you follow. Wealth is a tool, and character is the hand that guides it. If the hand is shaking, the tool is useless. If the hand is steady, you can build a life that will stand long after you are gone. The ancient wisdom is not a relic but a living force that is available to you in every heartbeat. The emperor and the slave both found the same truth, and it is the same truth that is waiting for you at the bottom of your box of unlived dreams. Reclaim your power and reclaim your time and reclaim your life. The system wants you poor. Stoicism makes you free. Arthur learned that the most important words he would ever hear were the ones he said to himself in the silence of his room, and he chose to speak words of strength and clarity. He became a man who was no longer afraid of the future because he knew he could handle whatever it brought with the same logic he had used to rebuild his past. He understood that the only thing that could truly harm him was his own poor judgment. He walked through the world with a light step and a heavy mind full of wisdom, and he realized that the 40 years he had lost were the price he had to pay for the freedom he had finally found. He was not just a survivor, he was a victor in the only battle that truly matters. He was a man who had found his way, and he was never going to lose it again. The road is long, but the path is clear. Subscribe to Money and Stoicism to master your finances and your mind. Like this video if you seek true freedom.